Well, hello and welcome to what will be an absolute bumper edition of the polling station. We have a massive Labour reshuffle to talk about. We have Scottish independence, very significant polling results there. We have some of the power rankings in the Conservative Party don't make for good listening at all for Boris Johnson. We've Jacob Rees-Mogg as well. He's up to no good, or is he not? We'll talk about that. We have Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi. And William, can I start with a quote? This is just beautiful. The gaffer picks the team. That's how it goes, and that's how it has always gone. Frankly, I couldn't care less about the circus of who's in and who's out, who's up, who's down, who knew, who didn't. Over to you, Ms. Mandy.
Yeah, quite the football analogy there on the Labour reshuffle, I believe. And I've got lots of thoughts on this, but it was a pretty big move, timed in a really...
Timing is the key, isn't it?
It is so often in politics. I thought the timing of it was actually terrible because just as it was taking place, Angela Rayner was at the Institute for Government giving a big speech on standards in politics. Some people have called it Tory sleaze. I think it's more Tory corruption.
She was caught kind of side-footed by the whole thing.
She was. And it's the second reshuffle in a row in which Starmer and his team appear to have blindsided Rayner. This time they say that there's nothing behind it and that Rayner absolutely, was central to their plans and was consulted. I personally think they made a mistake by sort of blowing up what would have been a decent amount of media attention of Rayner going on the front foot against the government into the dramas of who's up and down in the Labour Party. That's my view. However, long term, I don't think too many people will remember that. And it's a very big reshuffle and lots of consequences, I think, in the near and the further future.
Okay, so Yvette Cooper has been appointed Shadow Home Secretary. David Lamy's promoted to Shadow Foreign Secretary, replacing Nandy. Nandy takes a new role scrutinising Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove. And there's a lot going on here. Ms. Cooper replaces Nick Thomas-Edmonds, who's taken over Shadow International Trade Secretary from Emily Thornberry. Ed Miliband retains his role over climate control policy, but loses his Shadow Business Secretary role to Thomas Reynolds, and Wes Streeting is promoted to Shadow Health Secretary. This is a lot to discuss. What's most significant from someone who's looking in from Ireland here?
The most significant thing is that this is a shadow cabinet which is intended to fight a general election. It's intended to campaign on the airways. They want two things from this: more media performance with more oomph and more recognition. I think it's fair to say that this shadow cabinet has plenty of recognition, or at least more than the previous one did. And then I think in a general election scenario, they would very much like it to be the case that this shadow cabinet is full of performers you can have on media rounds, attacking their opposite numbers for any amount of perceived failures. For example, the fancy political matchup of Cooper versus Patel on things such as Home Office performance or whatever is probably something the strategists were thinking of. Interesting, really good piece by Sienna Rogers, editor of Labour List, one of the best journalists in the country. And it is on, that's just Sienna calling to thank me for that. And it is on... You
get it all the time, William.
All the time. It's basically on the biggest factor behind Starmer's reshuffle, which is a general election in 2023. Now, we have talked about this a lot on the polling station before.
Well, he's striking while the iron is hot as well, in the sense that, the Conservatives are in a very very bad way, worse they've been basically since the election, basically. And there has to be a timing here where he's like, right, I'm going to strike the iron is hot.
Yes, although unlike the previous situation, the numbers are just not there for an election. It's interesting. We're 7-4 on a general election in 2023, but I don't see where the appetite for that comes from. I think the Tories have quite a few structural problems that they will want to give themselves the very best chance of fixing, and it gives themselves no time to show anything for levelling up.
But there has to be deep concern within Conservatives about sparse at the moment, and this is only going to unravel further, surely.
Yes. Johnson, I think, will have a window of, I would have said 3 to 6 months to sort of steer the ship around. That would encompass
Do you trust that he will?
No. Primarily because it requires him to perform in a way that he hasn't shown he's capable of doing. But that's always been my view about him. I don't know necessarily about the views he goes in the Conservative Party. And we'll talk more on that later. Just coming back to Labour, they've set their sort of attacking formation for the politics that they think will be successful. It's a shadow cabinet.
Lots of football analogies today.
Lots of football analogies. I'm going to be paying royalties to Jonathan Van Tam at this rate. But the big thing I think for them is to try and replicate New Labour from 97. Now, directly copying that across is not going to get you there. I think politics has changed.
A quarter of a century later next year.
Yeah, a quarter of a century later, which I think is worth remembering on all sides. But one thing they will want to do is they want to set their own agenda, get a bit more control in the media, and just get a bit more name recognition, particularly as election cycles can creep up on them. And I don't think they want to be caught unprepared. And groups such as Labour to Win will have had big input on this. So it's a big move. It positions Labour as a party which is perceived to be on the left, but in reality is now, I think, firmly in the centre, with the right of the party very much in control. How that works remains to be seen, but this is an interesting stat here before I go on to some market movers. IPSOS Mori have been tracking the percent of voters who consider either party as extreme. Both the Tories and Labour have seen falls in this since the 2019 general election. The Conservatives are on 22%, a fall of 11%. Labour on 16%, a fall of 34%. That's a really, really big stat. And
it's off the stratosphere.
It is off the stratosphere, actually. Yeah, you are right. It's very rare you see those sorts of changes. And I think the strategists will be thinking about that party image. So the move has been made. We have some market movers as well, because we've seen quite a shake-up.
Do we have the Star Sports board today, or are you going to leave that in the background, the actual background?
We do. It might be heading to Old Bexley Sidcup. It's probably going to be still branded with Boris Johnson and those letters. So I'll update you more on that. But our market mover changes in the next Labour leadership market. Yvette Cooper is a 10-1 shot from 14s. There's been no change for David Lammy, despite the fact he's now Shadow Foreign Secretary. Bridget Phillipson, the biggest mover of them all, now 12s from 25s. Actually, earlier on this year, you could have got even triple figures about her. When I sat down with Matthew Shattuck of Sparkets fame, now for betting people, I think he was saying you could go hundreds about her. You could have had 66-1.
New Shadow Education Secretary.
New Shadow Education Secretary. I think she's got a lot of opportunities with that brief. I don't think Kate Green made a great impact. She's highly rated within the Labour Party by certain elements of it, and she's now 12-1.
That was Bridget just texting you there as well.
Indeed. Lisa Nandy, 13-2, out to 8-1. This is interesting because some people see it as a demotion going to the levelling up brief, but actually I think it's more going sideways, just in the sense that Michael Gove is a very important figure in the government, and he's going to have a big effect on government approval if he can get victories, or if he can get progress on any number of the things he's now tasked with. Wes Streeting is 20-1. He was 18-1. He's just been pushed out a little bit, despite the fact he's now Shadow Health Secretary. Streeting has been a market mover over the course of the year, however. He was once 50s. He's now less than half that price. So quite a few big name changes, or big market changes, I should say. Angela Rayner's now 7-1 from 13-2. Andy Burnham is still the 5-2 favourite. Not a price I'd be terribly keen on, despite the fact that if Starmer was to improve on the 2019 result, very, very low bar, or get close, like Neil Kinnock did, you'd imagine he'd get another run at it. But that remains to be seen.
For those of the people who are on Keir Starmer's to be 7-2, I'm just looking at the odds here, 7-2 to be the next leader. And those who've generally taken the Labour side in terms of the next election, will Boris be leader? Will Boris not? Will Boris be Conservative leader next election? Is another 8. That's 8-13. Keir Starmer to be Labour leader at next general election. 5-2, not to be Labour leader. 2-7 to be Labour leader. Where do they stand now?
You could have gotten pretty big prices on Starmer to be Labour leader at the next election just before conference. I imagine you'd have to be very happy with how things have gone now. If you've been backing against Boris Johnson to be Tory leader by the next election, you'd also be delighted. I'd have thought at the time of the Tory conference that 2's on was pretty big for him to be leader at the next election. That looks much less secure now. I think that'll be something we can reassess more in the new year because we'll have had 2 by-elections. Admittedly, neither will be fertile Labour territory from the point of view of Keir Starmer, but it'd be a pretty good bellwether of the Tory vote in the, die-hard Tory areas. So, long story short, those who have backed against Boris are looking to be in a good position, including friend of the show, Paul Cushman-Erty. Those who have backed Starmer and have backed Labour in any sense will be pretty happy with where things are now. It remains to be seen what the winter throws at the government. It's going to throw lots. And then, of course, we do have a cost of living crisis, which is set to hit really hard next year. A forecast seen by BBC Panorama today suggests that British household bills for a family, I think of 4, could rise by £1,700. That's a lot of money. And we know that a lot of homeowners who are like to be having those bills would vote Tory, depending on their ages.
Okay, so the last time I was texting you, or quite recently, I said the Lib Dems to win North Shropshire at 3-1 has to come under pressure. I see it's now a 2-1 shot, so I'm completely after time here and saying that I was right. 3-1 did come under pressure. Old Bexley and Sidcup's a little bit different. We've 1-16 Conservatives here because of James Bogenshire's death. It's a completely different election, obviously, but what can we, it's 1-16 and 8-1 is basically the betting here. 8-1 Labour, 28 Reform UK. What can we learn from this? Because it's not a betting race, so to speak, like the first at Dundalk today, but we learn something from it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in terms of, let me give you another sort of racing analogy now to add to the football analogy. This is one to watch on catch-up, to look and to compare 2017 and 2019 and 2021. A bit of background here. The Tories won by 41% in the 2019 general election.
Yeah.
Even at the 2017 general election, which was very close, they won by 32%. The seat is strongly pro-Brexit. It does favours Leave by 25%, or it did when the referendum was run. That's not really driving it. It's not really driving it. So if we're looking at sort of economic scales or whatever, and again, I must give a hand to Paul Cushman-Erty, friend of the show, because he's written a really useful preview, which is on Betting Not Betfair. But this is a seat which is pretty high on the right-wing economic scale. You might just say traditionally Tory in economic thinking. Cheshire and Amersham was 36. Old Bexley Sidcup is 45th. That's out of 650 constituencies. And whilst they're economically conservative seats, this and Cheshire and Amersham, they are so far apart on basically the issues that dominate the day. So, long story short, that is probably why you're seeing such a short price for the Tories here, where 16's on, and such a big price for Labour, which is 8-1. Now, interestingly, CCHQ has not been taking this for granted. We have seen some big names there. Angela Rayner has been out campaigning. There's been a call for turnout to really drive those turnout figures, which suggests that not everything is completely hunky-dory there. And to be fair, they'd be right to be a bit cautious, I think. But they should hold on. The interesting things to watch will be the Tory vote share. I think also the turnout compared with other by-elections, and also, generally speaking, the swings as well will be quite important. You know, if you were to get a result that was closer than 2017 off a reasonable turnout, that would be a good sign heading into North Shropshire, where the Lib Dems have been much more active, and generally speaking, where there's been more pressure. There has been some good reporting coming out of Old Bexley Sidcup recently. Plenty of good pieces. The Evening Standard been there. Ione Wells from the BBC went there as well. And there's a bit of worry about Johnson, but there's also a traditional forgiveness towards Conservatives, which is why I'd expect them to win the seat. By how much, I'm not quite sure. I think people looking for a massive swing might be disappointed, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it's very hard to call because you're balancing obviously massive issues in the Conservative Party at the moment, massive issues in Boris leadership with the context of the election itself and all the human sort of side to things. So will Conservative voters want to come out? And what does this tell us for the next by-election? Very, very interesting. But this brings on Conservative Home Survey of party members, net satisfaction ratings for the cabinet and others. And this shows Boris minus 17.2% and Liz Truss going well.
Yes, indeed. Truss has topped that for the first time, which is, I think, notable in and of itself, because she's always been quite popular within the Tory party. She's top, plus 82.3 ahead of Lord Frost. He is 73.3% positive rating. For those of you who are sort of sitting here in bewilderment at all of this, we must remember that is Conservative Party members who are surveyed here by Conservative Home. They do this, I believe it's once every month. Fascinating resource. The Patterson affair, I think, has had a big impact on Johnson. His handling of that and of other things has seen him tip into negative territory. For those who are looking at this sort of thing for the first time, Johnson hasn't always been at the top. He's had lots of pressures, whatever, to deal with. You genuinely have expected them to be mid-table or whatever, ahead of other ministers who don't have to carry the can for such things, but who have sort of more fun breeze that appeal to Tories more. Anne-Marie Trevelyan third, Nadine Dorris fourth, New Culture Secretary. I think people very much like her pugnacious approach inside the Conservative Party. Nadine Zahawi fifth, Ben Wallace sixth. The Zahawi rating is quite interesting. But Ben Wallace, I think that's a booster effect of his standing up for the troops and his being very mobile, active as Defence Secretary. Sajid Javid is in with 54.3, just ahead of Rishi Sunak, who's taken a bit of a fall from a very high place. The budget, taxes will have everything to do with that. So you're seeing it sort of shaking up here. But long story short, those who can be really bold and positive about Britain reap the rewards of the Tory base. Truss and Frost are in two positions which allow them to do that.
You mentioned Sunak, so just if we continue down the table, Trace Coffey, Dominic Raab, Michael Gove, Suella Braveman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who since this actual polling took place, is being investigated over a possible breach of the rules of MPs declaring outside earnings. I mean, this is the greatest league in the world at the moment. What is going on in the Conservative Party?
Same thing that's gone on for quite a while. And we do, by the way, have the evidence to back that up. Simply go and look at the register of members' interests. This has gone on in Parliament since time immemorial.
Time immemorial, really.
And the Rees-Mogg story, I should just say, if I can sidetrack a little bit, is quite astonishing. This is about £6 million of undeclared loans. Yeah. It's all, yeah, you know, it's the smaller things in life that really count, and that could get him in quite hot water depending on the nature, basically, of what exactly is found, but it's a huge number, and it's really, really bad optics. Long story short, if I can just give a bit of detail, there's no actually details of the allegations facing Rees-Mogg, but Fangam Debonair, who's a Shadow Commons leader, has been calling for the watchdog to investigate claims that he got £6 million in loans from one of his companies. Now, again, an MP is paid £81,000 or so a year. That's double the average UK wage. I think it's double the median UK wage in most places, even in London. And I think, I don't know how many times 6 million is more than 81,000, but it's a pretty astonishing amount of money. And there's going to be a great deal of interest in the nature of that. It should also be said that Jacob Rees-Mogg is an exceptionally wealthy man. So, you know, who knows what is going on there, but that's something to keep an eye on.
Something to keep an eye on. I'm giving my maths there something like 75 times, give or take. So, yeah, it is what it is. Let's talk about Scottish independence. A nice little rise if you're in favour of Scottish independence in the polling. We're talking about 55% in favour of independence, and this agenda is not going to go away in 2022.
No, it is not. And yeah, I mean, this is some really, really interesting stuff. So, across the screen, first of all, it's 55% now. Is the rough amount of support for Scottish independence. Amongst the likely voters, it is 52% to 43%. If you exclude the don't knows, it's 55%. That's very big. And there has been a recent trend of people suggesting that Scottish independence was dying down for the moment because of other issues and because of fatigue. This is pretty clearly kicked that thought into the long grass. It has to stay, and it's here to be an issue forevermore. Interesting things behind this now. Satisfaction with leaders in opposition in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon, net positive of 20. She's got 58 approval, 30 disapproval. Boris Johnson, actually guess what his dissatisfaction rating is in Scotland, and guess what his net is? 300. You're not too far out. 80% dissatisfaction. He's got a net approval of 64 minus 64. That's a 14-point swing in the wrong direction for him. Keir Starmer, interestingly, 47% disapproval, 31% approval, 22% don't know. That taps into a theme there, which suggests that people don't yet quite know Keir Starmer, which in some sense is a good and a bad thing. A good thing. You know
William Kedjanyi, though, and this is a point you've made consistently on the show, he's still struggling to actually reveal the real Keir to like everyone else, I guess.
He is, but he's getting more on the front foot recently. He's getting more on the front foot. He's been aggressive in PMQs recently. He was really on the attack of a Pippa Creer story today, which basically claims or accuses the Conservatives and Downing Street of having two bashes, one during lockdown last year and one during London being in tier 3 last year. You know, those wonderful times of substantial meals and Scotch eggs and pints and all that. Apparently during that period, during that glorious period in British history, there were two parties held at Downing Street. Both Keir Starmer and Ian Blackford went on the attack against Boris Johnson today. Also, he had an interview with Nick Robinson in which he did show a bit more of that passion. It's interesting because I don't have Starmer down as the greatest communicator. I think actually it probably formed part of the reshuffle planning. But when he's one-on-one and he does express his views, his strongly held emotions, it seems to work for him.
Wasn't there that interview in the Financial Times where he just came across so well?
If that's a print interview, it might be. Are you thinking about him and Piers Morgan? Are you thinking about him on Life Stories with Piers Morgan?
I'm not. I'm thinking he did an interview with the Financial Times where the woman who interviewed him said, if you actually see this guy face to face, I should remember her. If you see him face to face, you can see he has this persona. He has this there was kind of like an energy from him. But I think she also made the point, and I will find it for next week, she made the point that he does struggle to convey this in other circumstances sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Interesting, actually. I should just have a quick look at some quotes from a swing voter focus group run by JL Partners, led by James Johnson, who previously ran polling at Downing Street. These are some quotes they had about Johnson. Idiot, plonker, bit lost, puppet, but no voter chose Keir Starmer or Labour over him. They're still thinking about the personal qualities. I say that very loosely, but the personal qualities, stuff like strength and charisma or whatever. And they don't feel that Starmer's got it yet. But that said, there's still plenty of don't knows out there. That there are persuadables. And it seems to me, roughly, that the electorate is much less set in stone than they were around the time of 2019. So it is very much all up for grabs. Just quickly with Scottish independence, we are evens that Scots vote yes if there is a Scottish independence referendum before the end of 2025. Evens for yes, 8-11 for no, void if no vote. 20-1 for referendum next year. 2023 is a 5-1 shot. 7-2 for 2024. Bottle on for not before 2025. I wonder if that interests some long-term players, given all of the issues on the SNP table right now, including some pretty acute crises in Scotland.
I don't know how we can top this show ever again. There's been so much going on. Do we have anything else for the beautiful polling station listeners and viewers this week?
One thing I will say is keep an eye on France. It's all been kicking off in France recently. We are going to get to this. We are going to keep on covering this, keep an eye on it. Our market is down, but it will go back up. Been a lot of talk on this side of the channel about Eric Zemmour.
The French Donald Trump.
The French Donald Trump, yes. Considered by many to be quite an odious character, and I must say with good reason. but he has officially launched. Michel Barnier has also officially launched as well. He did that quite a while back. He's been on the warpath recently. Interestingly, every candidate bar Emmanuel Macron wants the French to withdraw from the Little K agreement, which I believe was the brainchild of Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac at some point in the early 2000s. That's interesting, especially going forward with EU relations. And last but not least, actually, Andrew Marr, who is going to leave the BBC in the new year, in a month's time, he is going to join the New Statesman as their chief political correspondent, as well as LBC and also, I think, Classic FM. So he's clearly not retreating into the limelight or retreating away from the limelight. We have a market on his replacement. 3-1 favourite, Nick Robinson, host of Political Thinking, Radio 4 Today programme host, also has been a stand-in for Andrew Marr. 4-1 for Michelle Hussein. Again, she has been a stand-in, also host on Today. 92 for Emma Barnett. Had her own show on 5 Live, now host of Woman's Hour, has been a Newsnight host before. 5-1 Emily Maitlis, needs no introduction, currently hosting on Newsnight. 5-1 for Laura Koonsberg, the BBC's political editor, who has been rumoured to be looking at a move away either to the Today programme
or the polling station.
Or the polling station, yes. So, keep your ears to the ground for any news on that. Then it's 32 for Kirsty Walk, 8-1 for Victoria Derbyshire, the wonderful Victoria Derbyshire, huge fan. 10's Clive Myrie, 10 Sophie Ridge, 12th Joe Coburn, 14 for Eddie Mayer, and 14 for John Sopel, who we've seen some money on from 20s, and 20-1 Hugh Edwards, 22's Andrew Neil. So that's the market we've got there, and I expect, or I really hope people get involved, because I think it's a fascinating betting heat, and at some point we might get the market back to your next UC political editor up too.
You'll be delighted to know that I'm laid low with a cast here because I've broken my ankle, but my friend offered to bring me over some lunch, and I asked him to go to a bookshop and to buy 2 books. One is on Charlie Haughey, probably the most controversial Irish leader ever, something of a hero for me, even though he was a complete rogue, and also a book on the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which is 100 years old at this stage. So what more can I do for you, William?
Johnny, just by being here, you've done everything possible, and on behalf of the whole team at Star Sports, I wish you a speedy recovery.
And we just hope that we've shows like this every week. That was Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi. That was a polling station.